Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome to Ummah Radio. You are listening to the Mustalahul Hadeeth class with myself, Abu Mus'ab. Alright, so we are still busy doing the kitab known as Muqaddimatun fi Usoolil Hadeeth of Moulana Abdul Haqq Ad-Dihlawi rahimahullah. In our last class, we had touched on the topic of Mursal, and that was basically what we dealt with rather in detail. The difference of opinion amongst the Muhaddithin with regards to how they consider a Mursal Hadith to be, is it authentic or not authentic, and all that sort of stuff. So we had stopped on page 44. We had just entered into page 44 and stopped at the new word, which was Al-Mu'adal. So inshallah tonight we will be continuing on from that point. So to begin, Bismillah walhamdulillahi wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. The new term we learn tonight is the first one being al-mu'adal. Literally translated, it means a problematic. When a hadith is mu'adal, it means there is some problem within it. So he says, وَإِنْ كَانَ السُّقُوطُ مِنْ أَثْنَاءِ الْإِسْنَادِ فإن كان الساقط اثنين متواليا يسمى معضلا بفتح الضاد. He says that all these mu'adal and these terms that we are doing now, it generally deals with a person who is missing from the sanad. So he says that when there is a person missing somewhere during the middle of the sanad, meaning not the direct person that you are, okay, let's put it like this. The Sahabi we're going to use as an example is Hazrat Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu, and the person who is narrating the hadith, his name is Abdullah and he's narrating from Abdurrahman, just for example. So if Abdurrahman is missing from the sanad, then this is either whether you want to call it the beginning of the sanad or the ending of the sanad, either term you can use. There's one term for that. And if the Sahabi is missing, then that's a different term. But now this mu'adal here refers to somewhere in between, not from the ending, not from either of the two ends, but someone in the middle is missing. But he says, فَإِنْ كَانَ السَّاقِطُ إِثْنَيْنِ مُتَوَالِيًا, when there are two consecutive people missing, only in that case will such a hadith be termed as being mu'adal. So let's say Abdullah is reporting it from Abdurrahman. Let's say there's 5 people in the sanad. The Sahabi is the 6th. So it's Abdullah who's narrating from Abdurrahman, who's narrating from Ja'far, who's narrating from Ali, who narrates it from Khalid, who narrates it from Hazrat Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu, for example. So now Abdullah, he says it's reported by Abdurrahman, it's reported by Ja'far, and then he says it's reported by Hazrat Ali by Hazrat Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu. So he misses out both Khalid and he misses out Ali, 2 consecutive people. Then such a hadith would be termed as being mu'adal because there are 2 consecutive narrators which are missing. So this is what a mu'adal hadith is. So he says that if 2 narrators are dropped out consecutively, not Abdurrahman is missed and then Khalid is missed, but so there are 2 people missing but they are not consecutive, then such a hadith is not termed as being mu'adal. These are specific terms, so therefore it's important we get the correct understanding. Although all such narrations would have problems, obviously, having people missing, whether it's 1, whether it's 2, whether they together consecutive, or whether they are 2 separate parts of the chain, but there are different terms being used to show where exactly the problem lies. So therefore a mu'adal would only be used in such a condition, or rather in such a case where 2 consecutive narrators are missed out. So he says that yusamma mu'adalan, such a hadith will be termed as being mu'adal, meaning bifath dad, with a fatha on the dad as being mu'adal, not mu'adil but mu'adal. So you don't touch much on the topic of mu'adal. Why? Because you will see it's a rather simple, straightforward issue. It's just simply 2 consecutive narrators who's missing. That's all that it takes to be considered as being mu'adal. Now we move on to a new term, which is al-munqati'. Al-munqati' also means a cut-off chain, and very similar to what we have previously done, but you'll see what he says now. He says وَإِنْ كَانَ وَاحِدًا أو أكثر من غير موضع واحد يسمى منقطعا. He says if there is one person who's missing from the chain, or more than one, من غير موضع واحد, from more than one place, then such a hadith is termed as being munqati'. So, like I was just mentioned now, mu'dal is when two people are consecutively missing. But if we use that same few people we were mentioning earlier, and you say now Abdurrahman is missing and Khalid is missing, who is number 2 and number 4. So they're not consecutive, but there's somebody in between. So in a case like this, where narrators are dropped out from different places and not from the same place consecutively, then such a hadith would be termed as munqati', but not mu'dal. Like I say, the hadith would still remain weak for that reason, but we would not use the term mu'dal, but rather we would use the term munqati'. He says, وعلى هذا يكون المنقطع قسما من غير المتصل. So based on this, a munqati' hadith is a new type, or rather it belongs to the types of غير المتصل. غير المتصل means a hadith which are not connected. In one of the earlier the question here, this is where one of the, or more narrators are missing, not just two. Yes, munqati' is more vast than just that. One narrator can be missing, two narrators can be missing, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, any amount, 27 narrators can be missing. All of it would be termed as munqati'. But I was just using the issue of two narrators to show that the difference between munqati' and mu'dal. Any case, he says, based on this definition we just did now of the word munqati', you come to know that munqati' belongs to the categories of غير المتصل, an unconnected chain. We did in the beginning, a muttasil hadith is a chain which is connected without any droppages to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And here we did that if one or more people are dropped out from more than one place, then such a hadith is termed as being munqati'. But now he mentions something else. He says, وقد يطلق المنقطع بمعنى غير المتصل مطلقا شاملا لجميع الأقسام. He says that the word munqati' is also used mutlaq in an unrestricted form بمعنى غير المتصل, to mean an unconnected chain. It's used in an unrestricted form to encompass every single type of narration similar to this. So mu'dal would be munqati', and mursal would be munqati', and all things like this. So different ulama use this term munqati' differently. Some would make it like this, that 1, 2, 3 people are dropped out here and there, and use it in specific cases, and then they would use the term as mu'dal and so on and so forth. But others would just use at times for a mu'dal or something else, and they would just simply call it munqati', using munqati' as being the greater umbrella section, or rather greater umbrella category, and everything else falling underneath it. So it's whether you call it 6 of one or half a dozen of the other, it boils down to the same thing. It's just two different terms that the ulama use for it. So he says, وبهذا المعنى يجعل منقسما, أي أنه لا يكون قسما واحدا بل يشتمل على جميع أقسام الانقطاع. He says, based on this, this meaning that we have just given now, that this word munqati' is used unrestrictedly for all types of narrations where somebody is missing from the chain. So therefore it will be a divider, meaning أي أنه لا يكون قسما واحدا, that munqati' is not one type all on its own, but rather it encompasses all of the types of inqita'. Mu'dal belongs to the type of inqita', and he will see the different types as we come along. So he says that according to this one opinion, munqati' encompasses everything, and according to the other opinion, they would use munqati' only in certain cases. So it's just the same meaning but different words that the ulama use. So that's the end of page 44. We move onwards to page 45. Now the new chapter is طريق معرفة الانقطاع, the method of recognizing the inqita', recognizing that somebody is dropped out of the chain, which is rather important. That how do you know somebody is missing from the chain? You don't know. It just says Abdurrahman from so on, from so on, from so on, from so on and so forth. So how do you know somebody has been dropped out? He says ويعرف الانقطاع وسقوط الراوي بمعرفة عدم الملاقاة بين الراوي والمروي عنه. That you come to know that there's انقطاع, that there is a cut off somewhere in the chain, وسقوط الراوي, and some narrator is being dropped out, بمعرفة عدم الملاقاة بين الراوي والمروي عنه, by knowing through the knowledge that there was no meeting place between the narrator and the one who's narrating from. So I'm narrating from, let's say, Shah Waliullah Ad-Dihlawi. Now anybody who knows anything about anything really knows that Shah Waliullah Ad-Dihlawi rahimahullah passed away so many years ago. So it's impossible that I could have met Shah Waliullah. So if I narrate from Shah Waliullah, then obviously there's something wrong here, because there was Adbun Mulaqa, absolute impossibility of us having been able to meet. So this is one clear way. But in any case, he'll explain a bit now in a moment. He says, you come to know that there's inqita' in a hadith in the sanad by going through the chain and checking each and every single individual person to know this person lived from here, this time until this time, in this particular area and things like this. So therefore, these two people never met. So he says, عدم الملاقاة بين الراوي والمروي عنه, that the narrator and the one who is narrated from, they never met one another. He says, how does this take place? إما بعدم المعاصرة, either through the fact that they never lived in the same time. So one lived 80 after Hijrah, and the next one lived 250 years after Hijrah. And one died obviously in 80 after Hijrah, and the other one was coming 100 and something years, born only later on. There's no way at all that they lived in the same time, that they could be narrating from one another. Or he says, أو عدم الاجتماع والإجازة عنه. The other way you come to know is that the two people never met one another, they never came together, and they did not, therefore they عدم الإجازة, there is no ijaza, no permission given to this person to narrate on his behalf, because obviously you never met him. How do you narrate from him? He says, بحكم علم التاريخ المبين لمواليد الرواة ووفياتهم وتعيين أوقات طلبهم وارتحالهم. He says, you either come to know this through knowing that the people never lived in the same time, or that they never met one another, or got ijaza, the permission to narrate from him. And this you come to know through ilm al-tarikh, the knowledge of history, of the history of the narrators, al-mubayyini limawalidi rawati wa wafayatihim, which is clear on the dates, birth dates of the narrators, and the years, the death date. So the birth date and the death date. وتعيين أوقات طلبهم وارتحالهم. It specifies the times when they had gone to study and where all they had traveled to. So he learned from this year until this year. He learned from this person and that person. He traveled from Makkah to Busra and to Basra, and he traveled to here and there. So all of this. So he says, وبهذا صار علم التاريخ أصلا وعمدة عند المحدثين. He says, and based on this, this knowledge, علم التاريخ, it is a fundamental and pillar which is accepted amongst the muhaddithin, which tells you that, okay, he'll mention it now in a moment in the footnote, but in any case he says that the knowledge of how to know whether a hadith is authentic or not authentic comes down and relies entirely on the point, on the topic of ilm al-tarikh, the knowledge of history of the narrators, because obviously without knowing the narrators you can't judge the authenticity of a narration. So he says that this knowledge, ilm al-tarikh, is a fundamental pillar of hadith that is accepted amongst the muhaddithin. Now on that point is footnote number 1. He says, وَلِهَذَا أَلَّفُوا فِي الرِّجَالِ وَابْتَكَرُوا فِي هَذَا الْبَابِ عِلْمًا يُسَمَّى عِلْمُ أَسْمَاءِ الرِّجَالِ. He says, for this reason, the ulama wrote books, they authored books with regards to rijal. Now, okay, I'll mention it now in a moment. He says, and they wrote and spent their time on this particular subject, and this subject is known as the knowledge of Asma'ur Rijal. Literally means the names of the narrators. So جمعوا فيه أحوال الرواة من مواليدهم ووفياتهم وطلبهم وارتحالهم. And in these books of Asma'ur Rijal, the Muhaddithin had taken down, they gathered together what's the state of these narrators. Was he an intelligent person? Was he a liar? Was he truthful? Did he have a good memory? How did he narrate? And all things like that from a character perspective. Also, it kept down what year they were born, what year they died, where they studied, who they studied by, where they traveled, all these sort of things here. He says, وَمَنْ لَقُوا مِنَ الْعُلَمَاءِ وَمَتَى لَقُوا وَأَيْنَ لَقُوا وَمَنْ هُمْ تَلَامِيذَتُهُمْ. He says that in this books of Asma'ur Rijal, it's also recorded who this particular narrator that we're dealing with, for example, who of the ulama he met, when did they meet, where did they meet, who were their students. All these sort of things are contained within the books of Asma'ur Rijal. وَدُونُوا كُلَّ ذَلِكَ حَتَّى يتيسر لهم البحث في أسانيد الأحاديث وكشف ما فيها من خلل أو ضعف وهو مفخرة المسلمين ولا يضاهيهم في ذلك في الدنيا أي شعب من شعوب العالم ولا أصحاب أي ديانة من الديانات وذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم. He says that on the topic of Asma'ur Rijal, that the ulama had written down everything like this until it had made it easy for the people to search with regards to the asanid, the sanads of the ahadith, and they clarified and made everything quite clear of any khalal, any holes, any weaknesses anywhere with regards to the narrators. So he says this science of Asma'ur Rijal, it is the pride of the Muslims. ولا يضاهيهم في ذلك في الدنيا أي شعب من شعوب العالم, that there is no people on the surface of the earth, no nation, no religion, no one who can compare or come close whatsoever to the science of Asma'ur Rijal which the Muslims had created for the preservation of the ahadith. And he says, and that is the fadl of Allah, and Allah grants it to whomsoever He wishes. Wallahu dhul fadl al-azim. And really, there's so much. That's the end of footnote number 1. But a person really has to understand how much effort went into the books of Asma'ur Rijal, that how difficult it is to write a record of a person. And there are hundreds of narrators, because every sanad has got numerous people inside it, and you have to know that this person, did he meet that person or not? What was his character like? Was he authentic? Did he lie? Did he forget things at times? Did he speak from his own opinion? Every single last thing like this, how much effort and sacrifice from the ulama it had taken to make notes of all these sort of things. And there are many books like this which the muhaddithin have authored, different, whether it's books which contain only authentic narrators, whether it's books that only contain weak narrators, whether it's books that contains both good and bad, and the muhaddithin would judge them accordingly. You have, for example, a book like As-Siqat of Imam Ibn Hibban rahimahullah, wherein he lists only people who he considers to be reliable and trustworthy. Then you have Al-Kamilu fi Du'afa, another book which only now deals with narrators who are weak, or Kitab al-Du'afa, or simply just al-Du'afa, different books like that authored by the muhaddithin which only lists weak narrators. Then you have other books of Asma'ur Rijal which the muhaddithin has written, which contains both sorts of people, like Mizanul I'tidal and At-Tahzib al-Tahzib, and all these various other books of Asma'ur Rijal that the muhaddithin had written. And you see that you'll find also at times that different muhaddithin have got different things they said about particular narrators, and this is what makes the science even more difficult. That is why when we started this kitab, I said that arguably the science of Mustalahul Hadith, Usoolil Hadith, is the most difficult of sciences of Islam, because you have to now look and you see Imam Dhahabi rahimahullah, he says this person was a good person. Then you find Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah may be saying this person was unreliable. Then Imam Ibn Hibban comes along and he says this man was a liar. Then another muhaddith comes along and he gives a different thing. Now you're sitting with different viewpoints from different ulama, all with regards to the same person. Now how do you bring all these different statements of the ulama together to come to know, is this man acceptable, is he not acceptable? All these sort of things. Sometimes one alim spoke about this person based on what certain people had said, but the people who he took it from it were biased with regards to that person. So therefore the view of another alim would be taken. Or you have, for example, people like Imam Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, who were termed as being more mutashaddid. They were much more stricter in hadith, not stricter in the sense that the other muhaddithin were lax, not at all, but rather he was more, let me put rather the word harsh, it makes it easier to understand. They had a higher criteria and for their acceptance of a hadith. Like for example, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, for Imam Bukhari there were certain conditions that had to be met for a hadith to be considered authentic. Yet Imam Muslim rahimahullah considered a hadith to be authentic which Imam Bukhari rahimahullah didn't consider to be authentic, and yet it's unanimous according to everyone that those hadith are authentic. So it's not to say that Imam Muslim and the other muhaddithin were lax. No, it's just that Imam Bukhari rahimahullah used a different criteria, more higher criteria than the others. Not to say now that there's some weakness in the hadith. So for example, you would find maybe Imam Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah puts the hadith amongst the fabrications. Then you have another muhaddith who maybe puts it amongst the authentic narrations, because maybe this Imam, you have, let's say for example Imam Hakim rahimahullah, he's a bit more lax in his acceptance, so he would maybe call this hadith authentic, and Imam Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah calls it a fabrication. Two polar opposites, one saying it's authentic, one saying it's a fabrication. Then you look for more the middle of the line ulama, Imam Al-Dhahabi, Imam Al-Nawawi, Imam Ibn Hajar, Hafiz Al-Iraqi rahimahumullah, and others who would then say no, this hadith is actually Hasan, or it's a bit of da'if over here, and so on and so forth. So it's a very deep subject which requires a lot of research into a single sanad before you can come out and actually say this hadith is authentic or not authentic. And unfortunately most people rather I would say don't realize the amount of research and information and knowledge it requires on this topic, and then you find every person and his friend coming across this is a weak hadith, reject it, kick it out, and all things like this without any knowledge whatsoever. Any case, not to digress too far from the topic, that was now the point of how to come to know that there is inqita', there's some cut off somewhere in the chain. Now we move on to a new term, which is al-Mudallas. Linguistically, al-Mudallas means someone who's dishonest or a fraudster. But although fraudster in this gives a bit more sinister meaning to it than what it really is. So he says, وَمِنْ أَقْسَامِ الْمُنْقَطِعِ الْمُدَلَّسِ بِضَمِّ الْمِيمِ وَفَتْحِ اللَّامِ الْمُشَدَّدَةِ. He says, now using the same term which was just passed by earlier, that according to some muhaddithin, they use the term munqati' to apply to all forms of sanad where there is someone dropped out. So a mudallas, there's also someone dropped out. So this type of hadith, they're calling a mudallas hadith, they're calling it munqati' as well. So just like I said, 5 of one, half a dozen of the other, it comes to the same thing, it's just semantics. Any case, so from the types of a hadith which are termed as being munqati' is the hadith which is known as mudallas. He says with a dhamma on the meme as being mu, not madallas, and wa fath al-lam, a fatha on the lam, al-mushaddada, meaning with a tashdid. So mudallas. يقال لهذا الفعل التدليس ولفاعله مدلس بكسر اللام. The person who does this action of making a hadith mudallas, this action of his is termed as being tadlis, and the person who does it, he is called a mudallis with a kasra on the lam. So the hadith is mudallas, the person who does it is mudallis, and his action is at-tadlis. Now he explains how this takes place. He says تعريف التدليس اصطلاحا, that according to the terminology of the muhaddithin, what does tadlis mean? He says وصورته ألا يسمي الراوي شيخه الذي سمعه منه بل يروي عمن فوقه بلفظ يوهم السماع ولا يقطع كذبا كما يقول عن فلان وقال فلان. That goes on towards to page 46 and ends there on the first line. So I'll stop on that point and come back here. He says, what is the meaning of Tadlees? He says, how it happens is that the person who's narrating the hadith, he doesn't name who his sheikh is that he heard the hadith from, but he narrates from the person who's above him, using such words that it puts in the mind of the listener that as though he is narrating from that person. Mudallas is the one who is a liar? No, a Mudallas is not a liar. Like I said, linguistically, Mudallas means a dishonest person, but let's just go till let me just explain the meaning of the term as I just read it now from the kitab, then you'll come to understand exactly who a Mudallas is. So he says, a Mudallas is a person who, what is his problem? He only does not mention the name of his sheikh that he reported it from. So let's say, again, it's Abdullah who's reporting from Abdul Rahman, who's reporting it from Ja'far. So, Abdullah, he says, it has been reported from Ja'far who said. Now, the person who's listening would assume that Abdullah heard this hadith from Ja'far, but he does not say, I heard it from Ja'far, or Ja'far narrated to me. He doesn't use those terms. So he said, that's why he says, وَلَا يَقْطَعُ كَذِبًا. It's not a qat'i lie. It's not an absolute, a real lie, so to say, that he's claiming this hadith to be narrating this hadith from somebody else. But rather, he's making it only seem without saying so. Maybe he's shy, maybe he don't want people to know who he narrated from and things like this, whatever his reason may be, but he's leaving out the name of the person who narrated the hadith to him. So for this reason, this person is being termed as being a Mudallis. He says, وَلَا يَقْطَعُ كَذِبًا. You don't explicitly come out and make a lie. So he says, for example, عن فلان, it's reported from so and so, or وقال فلان, so and so said. Not so and so said to me, so and so, or I heard so and so say. You don't use it openly as a lie like that. In any case, let's go quickly to footnote number 2 and you'll understand it a little bit better. He says, لأنه لو قطع كذبا أي قال سمعت أو حدثني ولم يسمع يكون كاذبا. He says, if a person were to come out and make a real lie, he would say, for example, I heard or so and so narrated from me, but he did not actually hear from that person, then in that case he would be termed as being a kadhib, he would be termed as being a liar. Because let's say, again, it's Abdullah who's saying, Ja'far narrated to me, I heard Ja'far saying, but he never heard it, he heard it from Abdul Rahman who heard it from Ja'far. So if he uses explicit words like that, obviously he's a liar. But he don't use the words, but he puts it in the mind without, he says it without saying it, to make the man who's listening think that he heard it from somebody else. So for this reason, he says, وَأَمَّا إِذَا قَالَ. But if he says, قَالَ فُلَانٍ, so and so said, فَيَحْتَمِلُ أَنَّهُ سَمِعَ وَيَحْتَمِلُ عَدْمُ السِّمَاعِ. It's possible he could have heard from him, and it's possible he didn't hear from him. Both possibilities are there when you say, so and so said. You're not saying he narrated to me, nor are you saying he didn't narrate to me. You're leaving it in limbo. So, وَهَذَا يَكُونُ تَدْلِيسًا. So this action is termed as being Tadlees. وَلِلتَّدْلِيسِ أَقْسَامٌ أُخَرَ لَمْ يَتَعَرَّضْ لَهَا الْمُؤَلِّفِ. He says that there are different types of Tadlees, but the author, Moulana Abdul Haqq Ad-Dihlawi rahimahullah, didn't go into depth and detail on all the different types of Tadlees. Any case, so a Mudallas, the hadith which is termed as being Mudallas, is such a narration where the narrator, he leaves out the name of his sheikh for whatever reason it may be, and he makes it seem as though he is narrating it from somebody else. No, maybe not. There's no malicious intent from his side. He's not intending to lie. He's not trying to change anything or anything of that sort. He's just, for whatever reason, he's leaving out the name of his narrator. And it puts in the mind generally that when you normally use the terms that so-and-so said, it implies that you heard it from that particular person. But in reality, you didn't hear it from him. So therefore, this action is condemned, and therefore the hadith would be termed as being Mudallas. Now, just to move on about the linguistic definition, which is now on page 46, he says, تعريف التدليس لغة. The linguistic definition of Tadlis. He says, والتدليس في اللغة كتمان عيب السلعة في البيع. Linguistically, the word Tadlis, it means to conceal a fault within the goods that you are selling. So let's say you're selling, whether it's a piece of cloth and there's a run in the material, but you don't tell the people that. Or you're selling a car and there's a problem with the exhaust, it's got a hole in the exhaust, and obviously if a person is going to ride, it's going to make a noise, but you don't inform the person, you just sell the car like this. You hide the fault which exists within it. This is linguistically what the word Tadlis means. And also he said, وَقَدْ يُقَالُ إِنَّهُ مُشْتَقٌ مِنَ الدَّلَسِ وَهُوَ اِخْتِلَاطُ الظَّلَامِ وَاشْتِدَادُهُ. He says, it's also been said that the word Tadlis is derived from the word dalas, which is it's when darkness comes together and gets mixed and becomes extremely, when it's darkness upon darkness, very, very dark, that is termed as being dalas. Some people say this term Tadlis is from that. Meaning things are called اختلاط الظلام واشتداده. Something is getting lost in the darkness, so much darkness there is. That's one interpretation. But linguistically, the other view is that, and this is really the linguistic view, that when you conceal a fault within the goods that you are selling, then this is termed as being Tadlis. So in any case, that's just the linguistic and the Mustalah definition that we had done prior to this. Then now he goes on, why was it named this? وجه التسمية به. The reason why the hadith is being termed as being Mudallas. He says, سمي به لاشتراكهما في الخفاء. That this hadith is being termed as being Mudallas because they both share one thing, which is al-khafa, something which is being hidden and concealed. So therefore, the hadith is being termed Mudallas. When a person is doing a sale and he hides the fault of his item that he's selling, then this is termed as Tadlis. Now, Tadlis in a hadith is when you hide the fault which exists. Maybe your sheikh is a person that maybe the people don't accept him, so therefore you try to hide his name and you narrate it from somebody else, meaning your grand sheikh, the sheikh who narrated to your sheikh. So you are concealing your sheikh's name here. Maybe you shy from him, you don't want people must know, and things like this, whatever reason it may be. So therefore both have one thing in common, which is the concealment, and therefore this type of hadith is termed as being Mudallas. Now what he goes now, Hukmul Mudallis. This is now Mudallis and not Mudallas. The Mudallis means the person who is doing the Tadlis. What is the ruling with regards to a Mudallis? He says, قال الشيخ وحكم من ثبت عنه التدليس أنه لا يقبل منه إلا إذا صرح بالحديث. The Shaykh, and when this term Shaykh is used, it refers to Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, just like when the term Al-Hafiz, and this is one thing which you will find which is accepted without difference of opinion, that when the term Al-Hafiz is used just like that, unrestrictedly, on its own, that it's unanimous, it refers to Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah. So if at any time you find that Al-Hafiz said, then you know without any doubt this refers to Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah. In any case, over here he says that a sheikh who is Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, he says that the ruling with regards to a person who it is established and it's well known that this person is a Mudallis, he's always doing Tadlis, then his narrations will not be accepted except when he explicitly mentions إذا صرح بالحديث, meaning not when he explicitly narrates a hadith, but rather إذا صرح بالحديث, when he explicitly mentions that it has been narrated to him. Okay, I'll explain that in a moment now. Let's just go on to the footnotes. He says, footnote number 1, he says أي أن الحديث المدلس يكون الحديث المدلس no أي أن الحديث المدلس يكون فيه الخفاء فلا يظهر السماع أو عدم السماع. That a hadith which is mudallas, there is something which is concealed, so it's not clear whether he heard from this person or whether he didn't hear from him. كما أن الدلس بمعنى شدة الظلام يكون السبب الخفاء. Like how this term, the linguistic term dalas, it means that extreme darkness which is a cause for something being concealed. وكما أن التدليس يأتي بمعنى إخفاء عيب السلعة, and like how the term tadlees is used to hide the fault of some ways, I mean the ways that you are selling. So was just a point on the reason why the term mudallas is used for a hadith. Then we move on to footnote number 2, where it said قال الشيخ, who was okay, can you repeat footnote number 1? Alright, footnote number 1 was footnote number 1 is in relation to the term when he says لِاشْتِرَاكِهِمَا فِي الْخَفَاءِ. The reason why a hadith was being termed as mudallas, which he says the reason is because they share in this condition that something is being concealed. So the footnote from that point was أي أن الحديث المدلس يكون فيه الخفاء فلا يظهر السماع أو عدم السماع. That the hadith which is mudallas, there is something which is concealed within it, so therefore it's not clear whether the person, the narrator, whether he heard from the person who is quoting or whether he did not hear from him. That much is not clear. At the same time, linguistically, it says that the word dalas, كما أن الدلس بمعنى شدة الظلام يكون سبب الخفاء. That linguistically the word dalas means that extreme darkness, such darkness which is a cause for things to be concealed. The darkness conceals it. And also وكما أن التدليس يأتي بمعنى إخفاء عيب السلعة, and also like the word tadlis comes for the meaning of concealing the fault of whatever goods you are selling. So he's just explaining why this term mudallas was used for a hadith is because it has these qualities within it. Alright, so footnote number 2 was just Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, وهذه العبارة مقتبسة من شرح نخبة الفكر. He said the footnote number 2 was just on the point of قال الشيخ. Like I said, Shaykh here in this case was referring to Imam ibn Hajar rahimahullah. So he says the Shaykh here is Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, and this quote that he used over here, وحكم من ثبت عنه التدليس أنه لا يقبل منه إلا إذا صرح بالحديث. That quote, he says this is taken from his kitab شرح نخبة الفكر. Now just to read footnote number 3, إذا صرح بالحديث, when he explicitly mentions who he narrated this hadith from. So he says number 3, footnote number 3, لأن الراوي الثقة إذا ثبت عنه التدليس احتمل أنه سمع من شيخه أو لم يسمع. وأما إذا صرح بقوله حدثني فلان أو سمعت فلانا فيقبل قوله لأنه ثقة ولم يبق الاحتمال. He says that when an authentic narrator, meaning someone who is trustworthy and reliable, but this person is a mudallis. Now like I said, a mudallis, a person who does this, although like I say linguistically the term means a person who is dishonest, but these people are not being dishonest. There are different reasons why a person may decide to leave out the name of his sheikh, and it's not necessary that this person is doing it for any malicious reason. But he says, in any case, if a trustworthy, reliable narrator, but he's a person who is known that he does tadlis, احتمل أنه سمع من شيخه أو لم يسمع, with this possibility now that he could have heard it from his sheikh or he did not hear it from him. So there's this bit of confusion over there. Then it's the tadlis. But he says وَأَمَّا إِذَا صَرَّحَ بِقَوْلِهِ, And this is what was meant in footnote number 3. إلا إذا صرح بالحديث, except when he explicitly states who is narrating the hadith from. He says, when he explicitly says حدثني فلان, so and so narrated to me, أو سمعت فلانا, or I heard so and so say, then in this case فيقبل قوله لأنه ثقة, then in this case his statement, his hadith would be accepted. Why? Because he's a thiqa, he's a trustworthy, reliable narrator. And ولم يبقى الاحتمال, this possibility of him having heard it from this person who is narrating from or not, this possibility is now gone out the window, because he's explicitly stated that he did hear it, or he is narrating from this particular person. So the only time there's a problem is when this possibility of him having heard it or not heard it, that's the only time when you're sitting with a problem that the hadith would be termed as being Mudallas. Now, moving on a little bit into the point of Tadlees, he says, what is the ruling with regards to doing Tadlees now? He says, حكم التدليس, the ruling with regards to Tadlees. قال الشموني. Okay, question over here. If the narrator, if he isn't a trustworthy, reliable person, then the hadith isn't accepted. Good question. In the case like this over here, where the narrator is trustworthy, then obviously we accept his hadith when he إذا صرح بالحديث, when he explicitly states that he heard it from such and such a person. But now when we have a case where the person is unreliable, now it comes down to how unreliable and what makes this person unreliable. If the person is a liar, like I said, Mudallas does not necessarily have to be done with a malicious intent. It could be for whatever reason, but at the same time a person could do it maliciously as well. Now if you have a liar who is doing Tadlees, obviously he's not reliable and things, then even إذا صرح بالحديث, he explicitly state I heard from such and such a person, despite that, but we know this person is a liar, so therefore we can't accept his hadith. Now you have a person who is su'ul hifz, he has a weak memory. Again, when it comes to weak memory and all these sort of things, we will come to it later on in the book, but the ulama will now look what type of issue is this. When did he narrate this hadith? Before his memory became weak, after his memory became weak. So there's a lot of factors to consider, but in any case, let us assume the narrator is not a trustworthy, reliable narrator, he's a weak narrator, whatever. Then in this case, even if he صرح بالحديث, if he explicitly states I heard it from so and so, or so and so narrated to me, even in that case we will not accept it. Why? Because it's now basically just a weak narrator in the chain. So the only time we accept a Mudallas hadith is when there is an authentic, reliable person who is doing the Tadlees. Only in that case. Why? The only reason why there's some sort of weakness, some questionability about the narration, is because this authentic person is not saying who he is narrating from. That is the only reason why we question the sanad. If it was not for that, we'd accept his narrations without any problem. But because he's not mentioning it and we know someone is missing, therefore we question and find out who did you hear it from. Alright, so any case, we were now on Hukm Tadlis, the ruling of At-Tadlis. So what does the ulama say? Is it permissible? Is it not permissible? So he said, قال الشموني رحمه الله التدليس حرام عند الأئمة روي عن وكيع أنه قال لا يحل تدليس الثوب فكيف بتدليس الحديث وبالغ شعبة في ذمه. So Imam Ash-Shamunni rahimahullah, he says that to do Tadlis, it is haram according to all the A'imma. There's no difference of opinion, it's haram to do this. It's reported from Waqi' rahimahullah, who's Waqi', and Waqi' when it's used like this, it refers to the teacher of Imam Ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah, Waqi' ibn al-Jarrah, who in that famous poem of Imam Ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah, shakawtu ila waqi'i su'a hifzi, that I complained to Waqi' about the weakness of my memory. It's the same Waqi' over here. So this Imam Waqi' ibn al-Jarrah rahimahullah, he commented on the point of Tadlis, and he says that when it's not permissible to do Tadlis with a thawb, with a garment, there's some fault in the garment. Here he's using the linguistic meaning, that when it's not permissible to conceal a fault within a garment, something which is petty, as you would say in that sense, a petty thing like some clothing, you can't conceal the fault in it. فَكَيْفَ بِتَدْلِيسِ الْحَدِيثِ, so how can you conceal a narrator when you are speaking about you're quoting a hadith and you're concealing something? So therefore, if you can't do it for something petty, like which is of a dunyawi nature, how can you conceal something of a dini nature? So therefore, he said it's not, Tadlis is not permissible. And Imam Shu'ba rahimahullah, he says وَبَالَغَ شُعْبَةُ فِي ذَمِّهِ. Imam Shu'ba rahimahullah, he was very extreme in condemnation of Tadlis, meaning that no one has put down permissibility that you can do Tadlis or anything like that. So that's the point of the ruling with regards to Tadlis. Just to go a little bit on to the question here. Is this because they took the literal meaning? The literal meaning? You mean the literal meaning of the word Tadlis? No, because Tadlis, the linguistic meaning and the Mustalahul Hadith meaning are they are linked to one another. The linguistic meaning is the Mustalahul Hadith meaning is derived from the linguistic meaning. So they're not two separate entities. So he's just using here like this to show that if from a worldly perspective you can't do Tadlis, how can you do Tadlis in Deen? That's basically what he meant. Okay, so just on the point of footnote number 1 here is just speaking about the narrator Shu'ba, but footnote number 2, we move on to footnote number 2 here on page 47. He says قال التدليس أخو الكذب. This is what he says when Moulana Abdul Haqq Ad-Dihlawi rahimahullah, he mentions here that Imam Shu'ba, he went very far in his condemnation of Tadlis. So but he don't mention what did Imam Shu'ba rahimahullah say. So here in footnote number 2 he says what did Imam Shu'ba rahimahullah say that was in condemnation of Tadlis. So the statement he made was At-Tadlisu akhul kadhib, that Tadlis is the brother of lies, meaning if you're doing Tadlis, basically you are lying. That's what Imam Shu'ba rahimahullah had said. وقال أيضا لأن أزنى أحب إلي من أن أدلس. He said another statement also from Imam Shu'ba rahimahullah, he said that I commit zina is more beloved to me than that I do Tadlis in a hadith. Obviously he don't mean he want to commit zina, but he putting it in the sense that zina, it is a sin from the major sins, and Tadlis is an even greater sin than zina. This is now one of the statements made by Imam Shu'ba rahimahullah. So that's why Moulana Abdul Haqq Ad-Dihlawi rahimahullah had said that he went very extreme in his condemnation. Yes, definitely it's not permissible, but these are the sort of statements that Imam Shu'ba rahimahullah had made. In any case, he moves on, he says قال ابن الصلاح وهذا منه إفراط محمول على المبالغة في الزجر والتنفير. That Imam Ibn al-Salah, again one of the very famous muhaddithin, his kitab is known as the famous Muqaddimah Ibn Salah. He says that this statement from Imam Shu'ba rahimahullah, where he said that it's better, I would rather prefer to commit zina than do Tadlis, he says this is a little bit of ifrat, it's a bit extreme from his side, but it's mahmulun ala al-mubalagha, it's used for mubalagha in the superlative sense that he's trying to emphasize the condemnation and to make people turn away from Tadlis. So he's not really meaning he wants to commit zina, but he's just showing the severity of the crime of Tadlis. That's basically what he's meaning. Okay, the chapter of Tadlees carries on for quite a bit. I think we'll do just this last point on the Hukm Riwayatul Mudallis, that the ruling with regards to the narrations of a Mudallis person, and we'll stop on that point inshallah. So he says, Hukm Riwayatul Mudallis, the ruling with regards to the narrations which are reported by a person who is a Mudallis. He says, وقد اختلف العلماء في قبول رواية المدلس فذهب فريق من أهل الحديث والفقه إلى أن التدليس جرح. He says that the ulama, they have difference of opinion with regards to accepting the narrations of a mudallis. So فذهب فريق من أهل الحديث والفقه, so a group of the Ahlul Hadith and people of Hadith and Fiqh, they went to the view that Tadlees, to do Tadlees is Jarh. Now, what is the meaning of Jarh? Jarh, this term is again another one of the terms of the Muhaddithin, which goes always hand in hand as Jarh wa Ta'adil. Jarh means to, when there's a fault with the narration, and Ta'adil meaning the Jarh is bad, Ta'adil is good. So some Muhaddithin, they consider Tadlees to be a Jarh. It is some fault, something unacceptable from, obviously, like I say, nobody accepts it, but some Muhaddithin, they were of the view that if you were a Mudallis, then your narrations can't be accepted. So this is what one view. وأن من عرف به لا يقبل حديثه مطلقا. And a person who is a Mudallis, then, and is known as being a Mudallis, then his narrations will not be accepted at all. So this is one view. Some Muhaddithin rejected outrightly the narrations which are reported by a person who does Tadlees. وَقِيلَ يُقْبَلُ. There's also another view which says that the narrations of a Mudallis person is accepted. But وَذَهَبَ الْجُمْهُورُ إِلَى قَبُولِ تَدْلِيسِ مَنْ عُرِفَ أَنَّهُ لا يدلس إلا عن ثقة كابن عيينة وإلا رد من كان يدلس عن الضعفاء وغيرهم حتى ينص على سماعه بقوله سمعت أو حدثنا أو أخبرنا. So he says over here that the ذهب الجمهور, that the majority of the ulama of muhaddithin, they are of this view that you accept the narrations of a mudallis, such a mudallis who is, it's known that he does not make tadlis except on such a person who is thiqa. So he only does tadlis from a person who is trustworthy and reliable. And he says, for example, Imam Ibn Uyayna rahimahullah, he does it at times. So therefore, if you find him doing tadlis, you can accept his narrations outrightly, because the people who he does tadlis from, all of them are trustworthy, acceptable, reliable narrators. So there's no harm in his tadlis. But he says, a person who makes tadlis from weak people and from others, all these sort of people like this here, then in that case, we won't accept his tadlis narrations until he explicitly states that he heard it. For example, he says, I heard the hadith, or حدثنا, this narration was narrated to me, or أخبرنا, this narration was read. Okay, here we have two types of hadith which is used here, two terms rather I should say. He says حدثنا, أخبرنا, and there's a third type which is not mentioned here, which is أنبأنا. And as you go into the science of hadith and the books of hadith, you will come across these terms a lot. Most 99% of the time will be حدثنا and أخبرنا. Now, what are the difference between the three of them? I wrote something on this on my blog, I think about a couple of years ago. Any case, when the term حدثنا is used, and this you'll find time and time again throughout the hadith, حدثنا Ahmad ibn Mani'a, حدثنا, so and so, it goes on through the sanad. So what does حدثنا mean? حدثنا is used when a sheikh is narrating the hadith and the student is listening. So let's say Abdurrahman is the ustad and Abdullah is the student. So Abdurrahman narrates the hadith out and Abdullah listens. Then Abdullah, when he narrates this hadith, he would say Haddathana Abdul Rahman. This is now when the term Haddathana is used. Now we come to the second term, which is Akhbarana. Akhbarana, this term, you also find it time and again throughout the books of hadith. But Akhbarana now is used when the student reads and the teacher listens. So again, Abdullah being the student and Abdurrahman is the teacher. So Abdullah narrates the hadith to Abdurrahman, and Abdurrahman affirms the hadith that yes, definitely this is the hadith. So then in this case, when Abdullah now narrates the hadith further on, he would now say Akhbarana Abdurrahman, for example. The third type is which is not quite so common, is Amba'ana. Now Amba'ana is used when there are more than one person who's present in the class. So Abdurrahman is the teacher, but now you have Abdullah and you have Muhammad, for example. Both of them are present by Abdurrahman, but Abdullah is the one who narrates who is doing the narrating the hadith to the Shaykh. So Abdullah is narrating the hadith to Abdurrahman and Muhammad is sitting in for the class. So when Abdullah narrates this hadith now on, he would say Akhbarana. But if Muhammad now narrates this hadith, he would say Amba'ana. So that is the difference between the three terms. Akhbarana, when the Shaykh narrates it. Haddathana, when the Shaykh narrates it. Akhbarana, when the student reads it to the Shaykh. And Amba'ana, when a colleague student who's present narrates it in that manner. So those are the three terms: Haddathana, Akhbarana, and Amba'ana. Any case, that was just a bit off topic. So coming back to the topic of Mudallis, he says that when a person is a Mudallis and he makes Tadlees from weak people and others, then we won't accept his narrations until he explicitly mentions who he heard it from by saying, I heard it from so-and-so, or so-and-so narrated to me, or I read it to so-and-so and he affirmed the hadith and basically gave me ijazah to narrate it, and so on. So only when a Mudallis who narrates from all sorts of people, only when he explicitly states who he heard it from, will we accept such a narration from him. Otherwise we won't accept it, and it will be considered to be weak, and whatever the case be, whatever rules it fall under, depending on the narration itself. But any case, the acceptability only comes from when a person makes the Tadlees only from authentic narrators, such as Imam Ibn Uyayna rahimahullah, as mentioned previously. So any case, that's with regards to the ruling of the narrations which are reported by a Mudallis. Like I say, the topic of Tadlees still continues on for a bit, but inshallah we will stop on this point here for now. And next week, inshallah, we can continue on with the Asbabu Tadlees, the reasons for doing Tadlees. Like I said, some people do it for whatever reasons they may have. Not everyone does it for malicious reasons. Some do it for malicious, but not everyone. So we'll deal with that topic next week, inshallah. But we will end for now on this topic here. And if you have any questions with regards to anything in the lesson, you can feel free to ask it now, inshallah. Okay, question over here regarding a mu'adal narration. When two consecutive narrators are missing, does the status matter? Status as in Sahaba, Tabi'in, etc. Okay, a mu'adal narration, by its nature, if you remember when we did the term what is a mu'adal narration here above, then we said that a mu'adal narration is when fi athna'i sanad, when someone in the center fold of somewhere in between the sanad is missing, not on either of the two ends. So the Sahaba obviously is at the start of the sanad, so therefore such a narration would not fall under the topic of being mu'adal. A tabi'i, yes, and the tabi'i, if those two people are missing, then the hadith would be mu'adal. So yes, but generally the status obviously, like I say, we don't count the Sahaba because they on the end, but nor do we count the person who narrates directly above. As you can see, he would be termed as being a Mudallis. But when there's somebody in the center of the sanad who's missing, and like I say, the center is anywhere from the, as you can say, from the tabi'i right up until the sheikh of your sheikh. That is the centerpiece of the sanad, where if two people are consecutive narrators are missing, then such a hadith would be termed as being mu'adal. Okay, next question. If the narrators who do Tadlees don't explicitly state the narrators when asked, are the hadith rejected unless they're trustworthy? Okay, if the narrator, if he does Tadlees, now you see, when it comes to Tadlees, they normally are not asked, because when the narrators narrated these things, the people who are Mudallisin, when they narrated these hadith, these other ulama were not around to ask them these questions. So we have a hadith which reported. So by the time it came to the muhaddithin, there are maybe 2-3 people, and the Mudallis had passed away years ago. So there was nobody around really to go around and ask him, who did you hear this from? So that luxury they did not have. So we look at now all the narrations of this particular Mudallis. Now we see he's reported maybe 400 ahadith. In 350 he explicitly states, I heard from this one, I heard from that one, I heard from this one narrated to me, and things like this. So therefore, in a case like this, we accept his narration, obviously, if he's a reliable person. But if he has some weakness in him, he's not a thiqah person, then, like we did inside the kitab, there are the other things to take care of and we look at, and then if all the criteria and things are being met, then the hadith will be accepted. But if not, then the Tadlees narrations of a weak person would not be accepted. So that's when it comes to the issue of Tadlees. And okay, next question here is, just to clarify, those who do Tadlees don't always do it with malicious intent. Some just do it for other reasons too. Is this correct? Is there also another term for those who deliberately fabricate Mus'ab narrators? Okay. Yes, not everyone does it with malicious intent, and in fact that is what the very next chapter, which is what we're starting with next week inshallah, deals with this very topic, the asbabu tadlis, the reasons behind why some people do tadlis. Like I say, for whatever reason it may be, whether it's for malicious purposes or not, so therefore they drop out the name of the narrators, I mean the sheikh who narrated to them. So there are different reasons why people do it. So it's correct that yes, not everyone do it with malicious intent. Some do it for various other reasons. And if there another term for those who deliberately fabricate Mus'ab narrators, okay, when it comes to fabricating, then these sort of people are liars, and they then fall out into a totally different term altogether. Fabricators are, whether the muhaddithin decide to call them, they are called as being a kadhab, a wadda', meaning a forger of hadith, a dajjal, as other muhaddithin would call them. So those sort of people are kicked out to the side as fabricators. But if a person intentionally leave out the narration, then obviously it comes down now to this Tadlees, because obviously a Mudallis is someone who deliberately has left out the name of the narrator. It's not something which slipped his mind, but it's something that he has done intentionally. And as you'll see here inside the book, as we do it next week inshallah, he says one of the reasons is, for example, you an old man, and you heard from a child, for example. Now you don't want to say, I heard this hadith from a child. So you leave this child, for example, maybe heard this hadith from a great sheikh, a senior alim, but now you narrate this hadith saying, the qala sheikh fulan, that the great sheikh so and so said. You don't say, I heard it from this 10-year-old child who heard it from this great sheikh. So because of whatever reason you ashamed to say you heard it from a 10-year-old and things like this. So it's not a malicious intent. You're not trying to change and fabricate and things like this, but you deliberately missing out the name of a narrator. So in a case like this would be termed as Tadlees. But when a person turns to fabricating, then it's a totally different story altogether, and such people are termed as fabricators of hadith, and they would be kicked out to the bin on the side. Wallahu a'lam. Okay, question over here. All the Tadlees is done only on the name of the narrators and nothing to do with the actual hadith text. That's correct. Most of these terms which we are doing now deals with the sanad. We moved entirely away from the matan. There are certain terms which will be used when there's a problem somewhere within the matan of the hadith itself, and that we will come to inshallah. But the terms that we have done now, whether it's mursal, munqati', mu'dal, mudallis, all things like this, these terms are specific with regards to the narrators themselves and not with the text of the hadith, the actual hadith text per se. It's to do with the narrators themselves. Wallahu a'lam. Okay then, seeing if there are no further questions, then inshallah we will end on this point over here, and we will continue again next week inshallah. So until then, we end for now when we say وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد سبحان الله وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.